Why is it so hard to do the things we need or even want to do? Even when we know what awful things are going to happen if we don't, why do we still not do it? You know, if you never sort out your diet and exercise, it might be comfortable at the time, but all the health issues, the hating how you look, etc., is going to be 10 times more painful than any workout ever would have been. Blue Lock's Nagi Seishiro explores them all in such a raw, enlightening way that makes you think, dude, you'd be unstoppable if you just did this, or what the hell are you doing, dude? And then realizing that it probably applies to you as well. His story gets to the exact reason many of us struggle to do the things we need to do. And it's not laziness, it's not lack of motivation, it's something most of us were never taught. And clearly nobody taught Nagi either. Because Nagi's life kind of looks similar to a lot of ours initially. Well, besides the fact that he goes to an outrageously expensive private school, but he goes to school, work, whatever, comes back and just kind of passes time. You know, he plays video games not because he particularly enjoys them, but more just because it's the path of least resistance. It's an easy thing for him to start up and do, whereas, you know, if you try to learn something new, tidy up, etc., there's that little bit of initial resistance that stops you from starting it. You know, and that just doesn't really exist with things like video games or scrolling. And because Nagi doesn't really know what he wants to do in life, he never even tries to overcome that. You know, instead he just drifts through life, day to day, existing, getting by and filling time. The irony being, of course, that is precisely his unwillingness to do anything boring that keeps him bored. It limits him only to the extremely mundane, comparable to only ever playing the very easiest difficulty on a video game. There's nothing engaging, nothing stimulating. The issue is, you could stay there as long as you want. You will never run out of kind of easy ways to distract or entertain yourself, especially nowadays. You can always find something to kind of distract you from that feeling of, I should be doing something right now. But it won't work forever. It won't distract you forever. It certainly won't satisfy you forever. At some point, that feeling of wasting your potential, of wishing you started something, and above all, just simply wanting more, will inevitably creep in. And so despite initially being opposed to it, when his friend Rio gets him into football, and at the gates of Blue Lock offered him a life more exciting than any nap or video game, he accepted. And things started extremely well for him, right? At first he was still pretty indifferent, but he started to get these occasional bursts of motivation, even properly locking in for a while, following some of the most exhilarating experiences of his life, far beyond anything he could have ever imagined before coming to Blue Lock. He was one of the best. He was an utterly dominant force who won without even really trying. With endless praise and admiration from those around him, he went on to face his country's U20 team, and in front of the entire nation, he scored Blue Lock's first goal to the sound of a huge, roaring crowd. Scenery and heights you could have never envisioned, even a year ago. In the Neo-Egoist League, among elite U20 football teams with 100 million fans watching around the world, it was challenging initially, but alongside Rio, he scored the goal of the century against his rival, a 5-stage volley that earned him an 88 million yen salary bid. He was yelling in celebration for the first time of his life. He'd never experienced anything like it. You know, he was on top of the world, and it only seemed like a matter of time before he'd go on to beat everyone. But then something happened. We cut back to him, and he's a shadow of what we'd just witnessed. You know, it's as though a part of him has been switched off, and he has no idea how to turn it back on. That excitement vanished, that initial motivation wore off, those bursts of passion which moved him to act just weren't showing up anymore. Playing became a drag again, and I'm sure we can all relate to that awful feeling where something we used to love and be excited about starts to just feel more like a chore. and inevitably, we end up performing far worse at it. He plummets down the rankings, and despite knowing exactly what's at stake here, knowing that he was about to lose everything he'd gained here, he just couldn't seem to force himself to do it. He knows something has to change, right? But he's still pretty calm, as though part of him thinks that it's inevitable that everything will be fine, right? As though there's no way he won't make it in the end. He goes into the final match just barely above the cutoff, and then he freezes up. He panics. He has to watch an old rival throw his previous words from the last encounter right back in his face. The world watches him crumble. His wake-up call came far too late, and that vision of one day it'll be fine would never come to pass, and he's eliminated from the world of Blue Lock. There were signs that Nagi's downfall was coming, but I think most of us expected this last one to be the game where he finally turned it around. I certainly did, because that's typically how stories go, but Blue Lock is not your typical story. It doesn't sugarcoat anything, there's only so many times you can last minute your way through things, so many times you can slack off before, especially at this level, the people working hard are just going to destroy you. And so he returns to the big, wide, scary world and has to watch all those former peers surpass him. He feels almost lied to, he was told he was so gifted, he'd go on to be so great, he had all these visions and plans for himself to win the World Cup. So how has this happened? How has he found himself alone and isolated, miserable and depressed, facing the cold truth that maybe he wasn't as great as he thought he was? Maybe he'll never live an exciting life again. Maybe he's someone who will just live a miserable life that he's not at all happy with. Maybe it's too late for him. And anyone who was ever referred to by the teachers as gifted will relate doubly to him. He never really learned how to struggle because he never had to. He never learned how to handle failure because it just never happened to him. It never really mattered that he was lazy or that he'd waste so much time, because all he'd hear and see was that he would go on to do great things. Like many of us, perhaps the reason he could never really bring himself to act was because he was convinced that someday, one day, it'd all work out for him regardless. He'd convinced himself that at some point I'll lock in and figure this out, then it'll all be fine. So he felt no urgency, no need to get himself together. And the worst part, the part that sounds a chill down my spine whenever I think about him with regards to myself, is that it's entirely his own fault. He has no one to blame but himself. Like all of us, he had all the information and help he could ever have asked for. We can learn how to do anything these days, and Nagi had even more than that. He had personalized training and advice from the world's number 2 player. But Jinpachi called him out on it the second he stepped foot into Blue Lock. Now, whilst Nagi could easily envision himself scoring the winning goal of the World Cup, actually putting that into practice is a whole different matter entirely. Anyone can envision themselves scoring that goal, right? Every kid who's ever played football has. I've done that. Right, but just being convinced it will happen, just being able to picture it, doesn't mean a thing. Nagi seems to frame being able to do that as a kind of accomplishment or a rebuttal to what ego's saying, but it really isn't. We all like to think we're capable of great things, and we probably are, right? But the reality is, by definition, most of us won't be. In a world that likes to push these glamorous shortcuts, these quick solutions and this whole idea of finding your purpose, right? The idea that one day you'll just find something that excites you forever and you'll have this amazing life and everything will be figured out. The reality is, nothing stays exciting forever. At some point, avoiding all discomfort is going to come back tenfold and make you extremely uncomfortable. And yet, much like Nagi, even when we know that, and even when we know we're going to regret acting the way we are later on, it's still not that easy to snap out of that and actually start. A lot of us spend so much of our lives knowing we have all this potential and wishing we were living up to it, but just not knowing how to get ourselves to start. And maybe that's not surprising when it is pretty easy to live a life just comfortable enough, just distracting enough to prevent that spark from moving us to act. That's how Nagi's lived up until now. Never excited, never proud of anything he's accomplished, never really living, just able to get by. But when that feeling of, I wish I was doing X, or I've got so much potential, I wish I was doing Y, or just wanting more for yourself, feeling like you're wasting your days, when that shows up, it's not going to go away by itself. There's a scene where Nagi meets Igaguri, Block's lowest ranked player who was eliminated alongside him. And Igaguri talks about how he obviously felt frustrated when he was eliminated, but he was also pretty happy with what he'd accomplished. Because, he knew he'd worked hard, he'd arrived last, and left with a professional offer that let him fulfill his dream of escaping the temple. It was all he ever wanted, he was satisfied. But Nagi? Not so much. And the important part is, when Nagi starts to feel like that, and wonder if he'll stay like this until he dies, wishing he could be fired up again, he just waits for that fire to come back. He doesn't actually do anything. He doesn't pick up a football. He doesn't accept the offer from a top professional club. He just does nothing. Too caught up in self-pity and what he could have done to consider what he should do right now. It's not too late for him, just because he's wasted some time and made some mistakes in the past, doesn't mean he can't start right now. So what can he do? Because I made a video on this previously and I spoke about how in my final year of uni, I did maths by the way, but I just felt like I could not bring myself to do any work whatsoever, no matter how much I tried to sit down and focus, it just wasn't happening. Right. So I pretty much spent a lot of my time just wasting away in my room, not really doing anything. And honestly, if it wasn't for COVID, who knows how well that last year would have gone. Right, I got pretty lucky with that because it meant I got to do my exams online, I just got my second year's result, etc. But ever since then, I've been thinking to myself, what could I have done to get myself out of this rut and actually, be able to do this work again? What could Nagi have done to prevent this when nothing seems to get you past that mental block? Well, the first thing I want to say is that it's sometimes fine for something to just not be for you. I've spoken about that in another video and how you can tell when that might be the case. But, Nagi was just kind of dragged into football by Rio, so it honestly wouldn't have surprised me if after all of this he just decided it wasn't for him and moved on from there. And that's never going to be an easy decision, but with the amount of regret he has and how miserable he is without it, it's pretty clear that football is in fact for him, and he just needs to get past this mental barrier. And I would honestly argue that the best thing for him to do is to stop directly chasing getting the fire back. For two reasons. So firstly, what I mentioned earlier about how he's so convinced that just getting that drive back is all he needs to do, right? But in that final play we saw, even when that passion returned, even when Agi was excited by how proactive Nagi was finally being, even that wasn't enough. Otia stopped him, where he straight up lost even with his best move. He's so focused on being fired up that he's not even really paying attention to anything else he could be doing wrong. And maybe that's not necessarily his fault, right? Again, he's so inhumanly gifted, within just 6 months, he's among some of the best players in his country, right? So, in the past, it has been true that as long as he gets fired up, he'll be fine, right? But not only will that not be true for you and me, but even for Nagi, we've seen that just getting the fire back is not the answer to all his problems, right? He can't just say, oh, once I'm motivated again, everything will be fine. Which leads me to point number 2. His problem is not the lack of fire. No one has it all the time, right? Even Chris Prince, the world's number 2, told Nagi that he doesn't have it all the time. His issue is just that he's not willing to endure or push through any amount of difficulty. And I think a lot of us are guilty of that at times, but being willing to push through that will get you back to that excitement so much quicker than just waiting around and doing nothing. Having a break from things is obviously totally fine, but in my experience, it's never actually worked very well for me when it comes to this. Or at least not on its own. What seems to work for me is building up that momentum again with a different approach. Him and Rio did try a new game plan, right? It didn't work out for them, but it wasn't the worst idea in the world, right? It was certainly a lot better than just quitting and waiting to be excited again. But it's still not Nagi's issue. The crux of his problem, and honestly the crux of my problem with this, right, what prompted me to create this video was that I realized I was just as afraid of being bored as Nagi was. You know, every time I'd go for a walk, I'd put my headphones in. Every time I was cooking dinner, I'd be on my phone whilst I was waiting for it to cook. Anytime I'd hit a bit of a wall at work or writing a script, I'd check my phone or do something else, right? And it sounds ridiculous, right? That these sorts of things that seem totally unrelated could affect your ability to, you know, block in and get things done. But it really does. You know, when you've hit a wall, you need to build some momentum up again. You've got to start small. If you can't get yourself to focus on the thing you want, then start elsewhere. Because you would really be surprised at how effective it is and how beautiful it feels when you feel yourself starting to get sharper, you feel yourself starting to be able to do things properly again. And that ability to kind of push through boredom and tolerate boredom really is a tolerance, it's a resistance that you need to build up. And so going back to Nagi specifically, every time things got hard, he opted to take an easier route rather than improve himself or try and find a way through. You know, he missed one attack against Isugi and immediately asked Ryo to bail him out. And it's so frustrating to read at times because less than 10 chapters prior, he spoke about how things that are a pain are important. And it's kind of maddening to see him just immediately forget that. But thinking about it, he probably never learned how to struggle through things that really take effort and feel uncomfortable and aren't easy, because he's never had to until now. You know, he's seemingly gotten through school without really trying at all. You know, his parents are apparently away traveling or something, so it's not like they're pushing him to do anything either. He's never really had to learn to develop that tolerance to discomfort. And so maybe it's no wonder that suddenly being told to come up with football tactics that work against such incredibly skilled opponents is just way too much and overwhelming for him. If he's never learned to push past that initial resistance with even very simple, mundane things, what chance has he got when it comes to something so complex and demanding where he has no idea where to even really begin? And maybe this is where Blue Lock just didn't quite work for him, because it was so focused on that big vision of the end goal and far less so on the simple fundamentals that Nagi was missing. You know, it put so much focus on growing that hunger and that fire that Nagi never realized that it's normal for it to not always be there. There are obviously a whole number of other causes for Nagi's dilemma, right? For instance, he had a very short-term extrinsic goal just to beat Isugi and had no idea what to do after that. Whereas now he seems to have decided that it's the rush of feeling like a god on the pitch, which is something he can aim for every single time he plays and always try and get the next time he plays too. And so whilst Nagi is undoubtedly incredibly lazy, I think more than that being a natural trait, it's just that he never developed the skill as such of effort, right? He feels lost and as though he has nothing he wants to do because doing anything new at all requires either some form of effort or an initial spark. And he doesn't realize that the latter often comes after the former. And these are lessons that you don't really get taught as much as just learn for yourself, right? He never learned that it's supposed to be hard. You know, like a lot of us, he never developed that tolerance for discomfort. You know, that's a skill, right? It's a real learnable skill, which is so easily lost. And I'm as guilty of it as anyone, you know, actually choosing the harder path, right? Not just turning up to work even though you don't want to because you have to, right? That's a passive pain, as Aggie called it, but instead actively, consciously choosing that path and resisting that easier path, you know, your phone or whatever it may be. And you can start doing it right now with the smallest little choices, and you will be so glad that you did. Thank you very much for watching as always. I've got a ton of other Blue Lock stuff if you want to see more. Cheers for watching, and I'll see you again soon.